Welcome to Being at Home with George. I'm excited to be here and to talk about this idea of creating the possibility to embrace whatever comes up and saying yes to that and generating the hope. And so today I wanted to talk about some basic ideas about what helped me when I started dealing with my substance abuse and my chronic pain, knowing myself, knowing how my brain worked, how the mind and body connect with each other, which includes the brain, and understanding that the autonomic nervous system has what we used to call, when I first came around, the brake and the accelerator. So I'd like to talk about the tale of the two wolves. It's a legend that comes out of Cherokee tradition, I believe. And this grandfather is talking to his grandson, and he's explaining to his grandson that he has two wolves that are inside of him, and they're having this ferocious battle. And the grandson gets concerned and says, "Grandfather, which wolf will win?" And the grandfather says, "The wolf that I feed will win." And so when you think about it, if we can be in love or be more in a growth mode than survival mode, and we can focus on creating space between stimulus and response, and in that space we can choose love, we can choose compassion, generosity, wisdom, any of those things that help us see things as they are and to feel more connected to ourselves and others, especially with ourselves. If we're in the growth mode, then we can see things, and then there's a knowing that comes when we can see things. There's an intuition, a knowing that comes with being able to see things clearly. I'm right-handed, so there's two hemispheres of my brain, and so one hemisphere, the left hemisphere, it's associated with the sympathetic nervous system, where that's the fight, flight, or freeze, or the left brain. The parasympathetic, it's a coined phrase by Dr. Herbert Benson of Harvard, referred to as the relaxation response, or the right brain with intuition, the melody, instead of the words of the song, 1 + 1 could equal 6. And so it's just looking at two brain hemispheres and looking at the autonomic nervous system as the whole thing, but there's the sympathetic, which is what we used to say in the old days is the accelerator, and the parasympathetic, which is the brake. So if we think about the left brain and the right brain, and we think about this idea of, the fight, flight, or freeze, we're in survival mode. And when we're in the rest of digest or the relaxation response, we're in the growth mode. And the interesting thing about it is that on a cellular level, we are either in survival or growth mode, can't be in both. And so when we're in survival mode, we're going to have this process where if you're right-handed, it's going to be fight, flight, or freeze, like a prey animal. And this part of the brain dominates. And so it's always going. And so we have to have some type of practice so that we can get into the rest and digest, where it's the opposite, where you're in the growth mode and you have the relaxation response. And the right brain is the melody. It's not the words. And it's 1 + 1 doesn't equal 2. 1 + 1 could equal 6. And it's consistent with the love wolf. So when we have love, when we're in the growth mode, then we have access to our intuition, seeing the whole picture. And that's the challenge. When people don't like contemplating or meditating or doing some process to access the rest and digest, it's by giving ourselves one thing to focus on, whether we're meditating, we have a single word, or we're just doing the one thing, where we can actually get out of survival mode, where there's no space between stimulus and response, and we get into growth mode where there's space between stimulus and response, because we're in growth mode, we're in love, or we're ready to learn, we're open, and we're in that rest and digest. And that's when we see things, we know things, we have access to intuition, we can see the melody, we can see the whole picture, not just a part of it. So it behooves us, and I'll go back to this idea of being right-handed and having these two wolves inside of me. This is from this Cherokee legend. So that informs how we develop, how we focus on growth mode, focus on what the lesson is, focus on being at ease, being relaxed, and seeing the whole picture, and not getting carried away by an episode of not getting what we want or creating failure. And so both the fear and the love wolf are there. They're not going anywhere, but the one that we feed, the habit pattern we have, or the way we develop where we're in the growth mode and we're looking at things from a perspective of the glass being half full or from abundant versus looking at things as the glass being half empty and being in scarcity and actually being in that fight, flight, or freeze. And that prevents the middle brain from functioning properly. It affects our immune system. But the main thing we need to get here is that we're either in survival mode or growth mode. And when we're in survival mode, how do we get out of that and into growth mode? And so I'll end by just saying that I got to this because I had chronic pain. And one of the things I had to learn is understand myself, understand I had this survival mode and growth mode, and that I could access the rest and digest or the growth mode just by being still and knowing, whether it's repeating a phrase or praying, centering prayer or meditation, or just doing the one thing, just sitting and breathing and just being with the body and just doing the one thing, just sitting and breathing and knowing it, or just focusing on the one thing and then getting into that growth mode and asking questions like, what is this? How do I relate to this? What's the lesson that I need to learn? And so I had to learn how to access my parasympathetic just by doing these practices. Meditation is one of those, even just critical thinking or preventive thinking, just thinking about, well, what do I need to do? What's the next thing? What's the lesson that I need to learn here? And so it's really more about understanding how to recognize there's no space between stimulus and response. Therefore, I must be in fight, flight, or freeze. There must be some fear there, even though I may not feel like I'm in fear, and that I'm focused and I'm dominating everything with busyness and going from one thing to the next, instead of pausing and then allowing the right brain to get in where we can see the full picture and we could have an expanse, or what they call a broaden and build theory, where we're able to have better access to our thoughts, our feelings, our emotions, and we have more choice there. So it's really important. That's what I had to learn to deal with my chronic pain, is understanding that I couldn't control my breathing or my stress level directly, but indirectly, just by directing my attention to one thing or to a thing that helps me calm down. It could be an image of walking along the beach, or it could be a poem or a memory from the past where I felt kind of relaxed and safe. And so we have these things just by directing our attention into the things that help us to be more calm, focusing on what we can do, focusing on a future that we want to live into, or there's a lesson here. I just have to learn that. That's it. And so that's what it comes down to, is this process really works. We're breaking it down to survival mode, growth mode, fight, flight, or freeze, rest, digest, left brain, right brain, if you're right-handed like me, the words of the song versus the melody, linear versus, seeing the whole picture, intuition, being able to access that inner knowing when we can just be still and know and access the love, access the growth mode. And if you're in growth mode, you can't be in survival mode.